Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Callahan. I'm your host for The Question, and I am joined today by my co-host, Hannah, who is here to help us discuss this idea of building design system infrastructure that lasts. And we just finished up the deep dive and are sitting down now to have this conversation, the recap conversation for episode 70. Hannah, thank you so much for being here and for spending some time with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And I also just want to say thank you quickly to Mintlify, who sponsored this episode. Mintlify is the intelligent knowledge platform. They're offering us a nice discount for members of the Question community. You can get 50% off your pro plan for 6 months by using the code MINT-THEQ. So check out Mintlify. And there's more information on that deal over in the FigJam file, wherever you're listening to or watching this. Hannah, I had so much fun this episode. There was it sort of went in unexpected directions, I think, which makes it kind of fun. We asked 4 questions. We said we had 2 that were a little bit more quantitative, and we gave folks some choices. The first one was, which of these statements best describes your company? Led by engineering, led by product, led by design, or led by a balance of those? Then we asked, on your design system team, which roles have at least one dedicated person? And we gave them choices to check, DevOps, Design Ops, UI Design, Front-End Dev. And then we asked 2 more qualitative questions that just had open text answers. The first was, who has responsibility over the delivery of your coded components? And the second was, what do you believe are the most important actions a design system team can take to create a system that lasts? We sent this out to 1,061 design system practitioners. We got 45 responses. And as always, wherever you're listening or watching, you can find the link to see the raw data yourself and do your own evaluation. I think we came to this first question with sort of different expectations. Hannah, tell us what you were looking to see from this.
I think the fact that led by product was the most popular response, that didn't surprise me. I think probably because of my previous experience in the companies that I've worked in, where it has quite often been products, like leading the decisions for the direction of what's being built, what's being designed, and then, causing engineering teams to have to pivot when they change their minds about things. I don't think I was particularly surprised by that, but I know that you were.
I was. I think I've just worked with a lot of organizations that are engineering led. And so that just biased my thinking, and a lot of times those organizations, the system itself may not live inside of the engineering org, but they are constrained by the views held by somebody like a CTO, and so in that world, this is speaking very generally, but in that world, there's a lot of pressure to move fast, and the amount of time I think that it takes to sort of raise the quality bar of design through a program like a system program is often not respected, in that world. So it's a challenge I think I spend a lot of my energy helping teams sort of work through.
Yeah.
So the thing that shocked me the most, though, was the low number of led by design. I mean, good grief. Yeah, just almost nobody, and I don't know. How do you interpret that?
I mean, I do wonder, if people are, within those, if people are saying that it's led by product and not led by design, who's doing things like user research? Is that responsibility within product rather than within design? Hopefully someone's doing user research. And I wonder if it's less of the division by role rather than division by responsibility, I suppose. Otherwise, if the design isn't at the forefront, then what are you providing your users really? It's kind of key.
Yeah, it really is. I do think it's been slow to see organizations acknowledge the criticality of design at the highest levels of the org. Chief design officers are certainly not as common as, chief product or chief technology officers, right? So I think in a sense, even organizations that value design, if they haven't elevated it to that level, it just has an impact on the culture, So, maybe that's what we're seeing here. There were quite a few folks who answered other as well on this, and we put a summary of those in the FigJam file. So if you want to see some of that, of that summarization of the other answers. The high level there is a lot of those are folks that are on very, very small teams. It's a small organization. Maybe there's one or two people like kind of part-time helping on systems. And so I think for those folks, it's harder to make a decision. Everybody's pretty scrappy at a small size.
Yeah.
The second one, more quantitative, was around the roles that folks have. And I think the thing that both of us were shocked to see was the overwhelmingly that most teams have front-end developers, even more than they have designers, which blew me away.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think it came up as well in some of the conversations we had about the number of roles that are available in different areas. And when I was looking for my current role, I was not finding a lot of developer roles within a design system team. Like, they seem to be few and far between, but tons in design.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting that there are more teams with front-end developers than there are with designers in them. Like, I did not expect that at all. In my experience, it tends to be front-end developers are borrowed from other teams by a design system team rather than actually being an integral part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely seen that model quite a bit. It's funny because Sean Bent, who used to run engineering for the Spotify design system, was on the call, and he recently wrote a post about how he sees exactly what we were just talking about, how so many of the roles that are available for systems teams are focused on design. And so I think, he wrote about that. I think others have felt like, hey, that's not what we're seeing. So maybe it's just sort of like a little bit biased by who's in our communities and the things that we see, in those feeds that we're living by these days. And the idea of borrowing front enders, I think this got into, I think Kelly had a really interesting observation, that she's also, looking around for a new role. And in looking at those job descriptions, she's just seeing the need for basically people who are amazing unicorns that can do all of it.
Yeah.
And so, this is a common problem. Of course, organizations are going to say they want somebody who's a magician in that way, but we all know the reality of that. It's really, really hard to find those folks if they even exist.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting transition for us in this conversation, because I remember as we were talking through some of this unicorn stuff, we had a great conversation Greg led around this idea of, organizations sort of asking for that unicorn person. And as an individual who has some of those skills in both sides, he's primarily a designer, but has learned to code. He was saying, I don't want to be a full-time developer, I want to use my code knowledge to do my design job better. Right. So I loved that sentiment. I think that's a quote that you called out afterwards. Is this something that resonates with you? Do you have that sort of leaning? You can do a little design, but you consider yourself an engineer, or?
I think I would never say that I could do design. I think I can appreciate what is good design. And I think that's what makes me a good front-end developer. I have an attention to detail. I can, build something pixel perfect. I would not want to be, I don't have the specialism, and I wouldn't presume to think that I could just do that because, I work in front end, therefore I should be it's a whole different skill set. And I think it's dangerous to devalue people's specialisms like that and say that everybody should be a generalist. From both sides, really. I think it's great that there are far more designers now who understand code, because I think when you're building components and you're particularly in Figma where you're sort of naming things, if you understand how the code works, then you can build components that are more code friendly for the developers who are using them. And I think that just makes us all better collaborators. But I think it's really dangerous to say, well, you know enough of this, therefore you can go and do it as part of your job. I think it really devalues people who are very good at those things.
So true. And I think this quote from Greg really does a nice job of sort of summarizing what I think you and I both believe, which is having empathy for those roles, having empathy for the challenges that are required to do great design or great UX, thinking makes me better as a front-end developer, So I think that's a fair way to think about it. I love that. It's interesting, when we were chatting before the deep dive, you called out this quote, which was one of the responses to question 4, which was about, tell us what are the things you can do to create a system that lasts. And somebody mentioned community here. They said, connecting people that ask about the system, right? Tools will keep changing over time, but people will keep interest alive. I loved that statement. You were drawn to it as well. What about that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, I think because we spend so much time really thinking about the tooling, and particularly me personally, like, my job mostly these days is infrastructure management and DevOps, which is bizarre for a front ender, but it's very easy to get bogged down in the kind of technical tooling and what tools we're using and is it the right one, and doing all of these things to build the resources. But ultimately, if you haven't built the community around the design system and you haven't put as much thought and importance on that, then you can have the best tools in the world, and if no one's aware of it, they're not going to use it. So what would be the point? Like, I think building that community is just as fundamental when you're thinking about design system infrastructure, because those are the people who are going to advocate for using it to other people as well, and they're the ones who are going to contribute back and give you feedback, and actually they're the ones who are benefiting from it. So they have to be brought in at that fundamental stage as well and considered part of the foundations.
I was having a conversation with some consulting peers of mine on a project, and the phrase human infrastructure came up in our conversation. And I think it's like, how do we create that human infrastructure, a network of individuals that care, that have shared values, to sort of coincide with the technical infrastructures we're building? I love that, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. We need to keep figuring that out. When we looked back at the data after you called that quote out, I went and just quickly took a peek, and it looks like over 60% of the responses to question 4 mentioned humans, people, community, champions, trust, those kinds of things. So even in a systems conversation like this that's very technical about infrastructure and delivery of coded components, the humans are still coming to the forefront,
Yeah. I think as well that also taps into a conversation we had about developers wanting specific frameworks. And I think, like, I was really naive when I first kind of did the web components research and was like, this is going to work. This is great, because I just assumed that I solved the technical problem and therefore I'd solved the problem, right? But what I didn't appreciate was the fact that I was going to have to go and talk to a bunch of developers who were very reluctant to do anything different to what they've been doing. And it's just as crucial as solving that technical hurdle is then actually getting the people who are going to use it on board with what you're doing.
Oh my goodness. It's the cultural side of our work, It's like shifting the things people want to do, not just giving them the tools to work differently. And so let's set this up with the data, right? So in the answers, there were 3 quotes that I pulled out. One was from one of your teammates, but they were all around this idea of like, let's try to make the system as framework agnostic as possible, and so that came through in, implementation agnostic foundations, or application being platform or application agnostic, right? So the idea of saying, hey, let's build something that can work across platforms, across frameworks. And a counterpoint to that was Joanna, who said, we've built our system into frameworks versus the framework agnostic approach. And she said, they had a big team of React folks and a smaller group of folks who wanted to or needed to use Angular for whatever reasons. And those folks using those tools said, hey, if you build this with web components, we're not going to get the features we need, the native to React, native to Angular features we need. And so I'm just curious for you, Hannah, as you went through that research and made choices and we could talk about your decisions around a framework agnostic approach, but like, was this a conversation you ended up having? Like, have you had to deal with this kind of conversation?
Yeah. And it was really challenging because, we had this kind of this longevity idea, this sort of bigger picture sustainability idea in mind when we were coming up with all of these choices. And we didn't want to end up building something that would be out of date in 2 years because we'd picked a specific framework and, it wasn't going to hold up long term. And so when we'd made these choices, we were like, well, this is the right thing to do. But then trying to have those conversations with developers where they were like, it's not going to do exactly what we need it to do, that was a really big challenge. And with one of the teams, we didn't really ever get past it because I think if you've got people who are very they're very focused on how they want things to be, and they're not willing to budge, it's always going to be a difficult ask. So I can see why there are teams who just kind of gave in and couldn't do anything different, because you also want people to use the thing that you've built. We went against it. We carried on because we knew that it was right for the system, and we crossed our fingers because we have a lot of product teams, and we just hoped that it would work out okay because we knew it was the right decision. But it was a massive gamble. And, we've got other product teams now who are using our packages and our React components, and they're so great, and they are advocating for what we're doing. But at the end of the day, had all of our teams turn around and said, yeah, we're not using this, it doesn't matter if we'd built for longevity. If no one's using it, then it doesn't even exist to begin with. So
yeah. Oh, gosh. And talk to me a little bit. So in the deep dive, you gave us a nice picture. You painted a nice picture of sort of your approach to delivering components. So with all of this as context, tell us a little bit about where you landed and how you're actually delivering them.
Yeah, so we did a lot of research when we started out, because we kind of were lucky enough to start with something of a blank slate, which gave us a lot of flexibility to decide how to deliver components to our teams. So I did a lot of research when I first started at Intapp into web components and whether that was the right thing for us. And so we ended up using Stencil. There are a number of different, they're not frameworks, I guess, kind of libraries you can use with web components to kind of make development easier, and Stencil worked best for us.
Yeah.
So we build our components as web components. Stencil kind of has this built-in React output target functionality to generate React components. And then we've also then added in something separate to do. So we've got a separate React 18 and React 19 SSR package. So now we can provide, we have NPM packages for tokens, styles, web components, React components, and React 19 with Next.js SSR support. So our teams can kind of use whichever of those they need, whichever suits their requirements. Some teams just use styles. Some teams use all the actual components. It's all there to fit what they need, basically.
Do you have teams that are just pulling in tokens and using those to kind of build their own, UIs? Or
we were looking at this recently, actually, because we thought that maybe we did, but actually the data shows that the teams are not. When they say that they're using tokens, they're actually using our styles package. So yeah, we had thought that we did have teams who were just using the tokens and nothing else, but I think they are actually using the styles. So not quite, but it's there and available should they want to do that, and should it be the right thing for them to do.
Yeah.
Our mobile team use our tokens, actually, because we can't really provide much else for them at the moment.
Yeah. So the styles package, is that like a big CSS file, basically?
It's a lot of different CSS files.
Okay.
So we have like individual ones for components. So, if they built their own button, they can use our button CSS.
Sure.
But then we also have like our kind of base styles as well. We're just getting into theming. So we'll have like dark mode, light mode in there and everything as well. So
nice. Very cool. And so what a nice approach that you've taken that sort of gets you a whole lot with a small team. And I know we talked a little bit about some of the automation there of like being able to generate stuff for different versions of React and some server-side rendering libraries as well. You also have talked a little bit about some of the additional script stuff that happens when you do one of these builds. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Yeah. So I think it was one of the issues that I can't remember who mentioned it, but sort of what they got from using web components and putting a React wrap around it didn't suit what their teams wanted. And we ran into the same problem, just running the kind of the basic stencil function didn't immediately give us the perfect React component. So I ended up writing a lot of kind of post-processing scripting on top of that. A few things were just kind of like nice quality of life things, like moving stuff into specific component directories, not just having like everything in one massive directory.
Sure.
But then also adding things like a standalone types file doing things like pulling through default values. So we would get the default values working in web components, but that wasn't then translating through to React. So the script was pulling those out and then adding them in as a fallback if a prop value wasn't passed in for where there were defaults needed. And just generally adding things like, when we had required props, that wasn't always translating through to React, and just making sure that those things worked as we would want them to. And generally kind of making them as kind of as good as possible for our React developers, so they couldn't turn around and say, oh, well, we don't get any of this stuff, so we're not going to bother using it. Anything that we noticed was missing went in the script, and it does a lot of work now. It's got a bit out of hand, and I've had to split it out into a lot of separate files, but it's working, and it's useful to be able to have that control over it as well.
Yeah, that's so nice. And your consuming engineering teams are lucky to have a system team that's that nuanced, like thinking about those things. It makes adoption much more an easier choice, I think, for teams when you take that care,
I think we kind of realized that we had to as well. Like, if we wanted our teams to even consider adopting anything from the coded side of the design system, we had to make it as painless as possible for them.
Yeah.
So we were very aware of the fact that it felt like we were asking them to do more when they didn't want to do it, despite knowing, like, it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, it'll benefit you in the long run, but you're not going to see it now.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of make it as easy as possible, so they wouldn't just say, no, we're not doing it. It's too much for us to take it on.
Did they, when you started getting teams to adopt the Stencil generated versions of components, was that a big lift for them? Because there was already stuff available to them in React. Is that fair? Is that right? Or
one team, the team who'd originally started the design system, was a product team, and they had some components in React in there. The team that we work with mainly at the moment, it's a really nice kind of collaborative relationship we have with them, where they're doing a lot of work on different things, and they'll come to us and say, do you have this component? We're looking at adding it in. And they were using Material UI, so they've been kind of really used to that. And there were some things where they were like, well, actually Material works better for this, but we also want to use the design system. And I think having those conversations where it's like, you don't have to take everything that we're offering, like, making that distinction between, like, well, you have very specific requirements for this component, and that kind of makes it not really useful to have it in the design system in this way.
Right.
Like, you do what you need to do, and we'll provide you with the things that, that are kind of a bit more generic that you need all over the place.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think when we had those sort of discussions, that's where we could start to see the real value, because, we weren't kind of holding them back by saying, like, oh, we can't make our component do this specific behavior. It was making that distinction of, like, this is here to work for you, to try and help you with what you're doing. It's not here to kind of tie your hands behind your back and stop you trying to build what you need to build. So it's been really good to work with them, and they've been really good at, like, providing feedback on components and things as well. So it's a good working relationship. But then I think that, again, it comes back to the community thing, where that kind of relationship, that's what is going to make it successful.
That is such a refreshing posture to hear from a system team, and the fact that you're in an organization that sees that the system shouldn't have everything in it. Like, that is such a framing assumption that I think a lot of leadership especially has around when they, invest in a system team. They think the system team will build all the components that any product team might need. And that's just not a smart way to operate, So your mentality of, like, hey, what's common? What's everywhere? Let's focus on that stuff, I think, is so easy and smart to do. A pivot away from this. We spent a lot of time talking about the delivery of components, but we didn't really just talk about the bigger bucket of DevOps. Can you give us sort of your perspective? Like, what is that, and what does it, and what should it contain?
I think, like, in terms of, like, what I do on the day-to-day, like, I make sure that our teams can get those packages. we have like we use Artifactory to host our private packages across the company, and we use that for hours. And so like I have a lot of responsibility over making sure that when we deploy, the pipeline runs properly and those updates get put out there. But we also have like Storybook as well, and sort of making sure that all of that is up to date and the pipeline is run properly. A lot of it comes down to whether the pipelines run properly.
Yeah.
But also things like testing as well. The team that we're working with really closely, we've had a lot of issues. Well, they've had a lot of issues with testing. And we've sort of tried to help out with that. But one of the biggest things that came out of that was making sure that teams could be certain that the components we were providing them with were adequately tested. So that was kind of big for us. It's like, how do we improve visibility on this? Because, we need to test our components, but then also we want to provide this reassurance to our product teams that we're doing that, because we can say, oh, we've run tests, but they just have to take our word for it.
Yeah.
So trying to move that into kind of a more visible place and make it so that, yes, it's functional, but actually it provides an extra benefit in that it's providing trust and security to our teams as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different aspects to it, but we are essentially providing a service. So from the DevOps side of things, it's making sure that everything's working as it should do and running properly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What percentage of your time would you say, Hannah, is managing sort of DevOps-y, kind of like pipeline-y type stuff versus working on components?
Oh, 100% of my time.
100%.
I've built, since I started at Intapp nearly 2 years ago, I've built one component.
Okay.
Which was, arguably it was it was a radio button and radio button group, one or two components, depending on how you look at it. It was complicated. It took a while, but that's all I've done. Because my focus has been on everything else, infrastructure, DevOps related. So whether that's kind of upgrading our Storybook so that we can get the latest features. We had to move deployment from Jenkins to Azure pipelines. So getting all of that, making sure that I was maintaining both though, because we were using two different Artifactory resources at that point. We were moving from one to the other, but I had to maintain the old one because some of our teams hadn't moved yet. So keeping that in mind. I'm currently working on developing an AI chatbot integration to bring all of our different documentation sources together. I don't build components. I thought this would be my job. I thought it would be building components, and I don't do that, which is interesting for a UI engineer.
Yeah, that's incredible. What a amazing opportunity to sort of broaden your expertise, though. Like we were saying earlier, like a deep understanding of these other specializations will make you better at anything, really, in the scope of our work. So that's really cool. Anything else on your mind, Hannah, that you want to talk about?
Oh yeah, talking about we've talked about sort of agnostic on the development side, but the design side, I think that's a really, really interesting area that I don't really have an answer for. And it was really interesting. It was particularly interesting to hear what Guy has been doing. But it does kind of feel at the moment that everybody is just very much tied into Figma and there aren't alternatives. But I don't know if that's sustainable. And what do we do about that?
Right. Yeah. So the context for this part of our deep dive conversation was, as we were acknowledging this specific episode was more focused on engineering, dev assets specifically. But when we started thinking about this idea and seeing it in the answers from folks of platform or framework agnostic components, that got me thinking hey, that seems to be something we talk about a lot on the dev side, but not so much on the design side. And so one of the things that I've been working with a lot of my consulting and coaching clients is this mindset shift away from them thinking so much about their design system as a Figma file and a React component library or whatever, and more that the system sort of exists absent all of that. And it is this kind of concept. And actually Sean hinted at this because at Spotify, he said they treated Figma as a platform. So they supported 4 platforms: Figma, iOS, Android, and web.
Yep.
And so, or React, I think, for them. And so they had these 4 platforms. Figma was one of the platforms, right? And so to think that way means that you've abstracted your system above any platform, any tooling. And maybe this is like, the way I think about it is this documentation driven implementation, right? We document and we define with words, we define the thing. And then we have what we need to implement in any tool, in any design tool, in any engineering tool. And so I don't know, it's a very theoretical concept. I know there are folks, Nathan Curtis is working on this, Kevin Muldoon's working on this, just folks who are saying, hey, how do we, articulate everything about a component with data, like a YAML file or a JSON file or something, right? And say, like, with this source of truth, we could sort of convert it to a Figma file, or convert it to a penpot file, or convert it to a React component, or whatever,
I think the Figma as a separate platform thing is really interesting. And then, if I think about like our zero height documentation, we have a section where we pull in our storybook stuff for our coded components because that has like the code examples in. And then we have a bit where we pull in the Figma designs, but it's the same thing, right? Like, we're pulling in these things, but the documentation is kind of bringing everything together. It's like, we know this is what a component is. This is what a component is in Figma. This is what a component is in React. This is what it is. So I think it's a really useful way to look at it. And I've not really heard anyone talk about it like that before. And that's, I like that as a concept. Yeah.
Really nice framing for systems work in general. And I think it is actually, coming back to our original questions here on this episode, it is a strong mindset for creating something that lasts, because the frameworks will change, the tools will change. I mean, 5 years from now, we are not going to be using the same stuff we're using now. So how do we make something that can last,
Yeah.
Well, Hannah, amazing episode. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experience, your wisdom, for helping facilitate this conversation. We'll definitely have to get you back. I really enjoyed it and just appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great.